1310 WIBA and Ask the Experts, joined this morning by Chartered Financial Analyst Tom Plumb. Tom comes to us from Wisconsin Capital Management, their website, wiscap.com. That's WISCAP.com. Again, you can learn more about Tom and Wisconsin Capital Management all on their website, wiscap.com. Tom, how you doing this morning?
We're doing great, Sean. It's a beautiful day here in Wisconsin.
It sure is, and what a day we had yesterday. Good numbers yesterday, and of course, always use some more of that good stuff. And this week, we're going to kind of pick up. We started a conversation last week about things like asset allocation, time frame, volatility versus risk, and that. And we're going to talk about something I know you've mentioned on the program before. This week, we're going to talk about, continuing along those lines, we're going to talk about compounding. But before we get to this week's topic, real quick, let's talk a little bit about Wisconsin Capital Management, talk a little bit about you, talk about your son, Nate, and exactly how Wisconsin Capital Management came to be.
Well, Wisconsin Capital Management was started in the 1980s by myself and a couple partners, and after a few iterations, about the last more than dozen years, Nathan Plumb joined me as a full partner, and we're working to provide portfolio management, investment analysis, and how that fits into personal planning, like estate planning, tax planning, and how you can apply expertise in the investment markets to your own personal needs.
What about, and of course, you are a CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst. For folks that aren't familiar with that designation, let's talk a little bit about what that is and what makes it so unique.
Well, the CFA started a long time ago, and it's a professional designation where you have to show that you have a certain number of years that you've operated and show that you match certain ethical and professional standards. And then you take a test each year for 3 separate years, different aspects of investment analysis. And assuming that you meet all those requirements and continue to meet them, you're able to keep this designation of CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst, meaning that you analyze investments and their merits and how they apply to individuals.
Tom, do you think
foundations?
Do you think that there's a lot of confusion sometimes for the? I know that over the years that there've been attempts to maybe make it more, I remember like with credit cards, there's always, even to this day, they're still very confusing to understand the terms, but there used to be, I remember like the first credit card I ever got in my life, there was like 15 pages of stuff that, the average person, we'd never be able to fully understand or consume. I'm assuming there's even probably some lawyers that read that stuff and were like, wait, what the heck is going on? In the financial world, it seems like they've tried to simplify that. Do you think, though, that there's still some confusion on that side as well, Tom?
Well, I certainly think there is. There's certified financial planners, which are people who, again, look at investments basically from an aspect of how they historically have acted, and then they'll try to help you with your financial planning, what will happen to your investments over time, and whether or not you're saving to meet your goals. An analyst actually looks beyond what the we actually look into what makes those numbers and how they apply to individuals. So a certified financial planner wouldn't necessarily be certified to question some of the assumptions there. Nathan and I like to look at why those assumptions are there, what are the environment that made those things work, and how that environment's changed. And we like to look at the underlying investments to see if they make sense and will continue to make sense in a crazy changing environment.
I always comment about other aspects of life. Like I always say, like, it doesn't necessarily take a brilliant person to figure out if you're on a plane and it's got trouble. You just go, hey, there's something wrong with this plane. It takes a real specialized person to know how to address that. For folks that look at pilots and don't understand what their skill is, they're able to very quickly figure out and assess and really right the ship. And it sounds to me like a chartered financial analyst is similar to that, in that there's this area of expertise that it's more than just saying, hey, something's happening. It's looking deeper to saying something's happening, this is why, and this is how to respond.
That's what we're certainly trying to do, Sean.
Talking this morning with chartered financial analyst Tom Plumb with Wisconsin Capital Management. So this week we're going to be doing a bit of a Mythbusters edition. And Tom, let's start off with a little quote from Winston Churchill that you shared with me. Let's talk a little bit about that quote and why it's pertinent to today's conversation.
Winston Churchill once said, "However beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results." And what that means to us in the financial planning and financial investing markets is that there are a lot of different theories, there are a lot of different cycles in the investment markets, but how they're applied, how they're working on your behalf, that can be a real challenge to look at and try to determine how they'll be in the future. So what we found is that a lot of times there's general rules of thumb, if you will, and they are being used to give people advice or to tell people how they should invest their funds. And sometimes when you look beyond what this historical numbers are or what made those historical numbers and take them apart, you can come up with a whole different solution or a whole different scenario.
Talking this morning with, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt there, Tom. Talking this morning with Tom Plumb of Wisconsin Capital Management, online, WISCAP.com. That's WISCAP.com, WISCAP.com. Of course, Tom is a chartered financial analyst with Wisconsin Capital Management. So as we mentioned last week, of course, we talked about asset allocation, time frame, volatility versus risk. And I know we've talked in the past a little bit about compounding. What are we going to address this week, Tom?
We're going to talk about a couple of the myths out there that actually can prevent people from reaching their financial goals. One of them is concerning diversification and how that can help you or how it may not help you. And I think there's a couple myths right along that subject that I think are pretty important. One thing, a lot of people know the Dow Jones Industrial Average. People more often talk about the S&P 500 as a real gauge of what's happening in the stock market in the United States. But when you look at these 500 companies, you often are being told that if you invest in some type of index fund or ETF, you could be diversified. But again, looking beyond those numbers, the top 10 companies in the S&P 500 are almost 40% of the total. The top 20% are over, the top 20 holdings are over almost 50% of the holdings. What that means is that these 20 stocks have more influence on what the S&P 500 does day to day, year to year, than the rest of the 480 stocks. So you're really not diversified when you look at, do I diversify by putting my money into an index fund like the S&P 500? The top 10 companies in that who have the greatest influence on the direction and the amplitude of the S&P 500, 8 of those 10 are technology companies. They may be wonderful companies, and there's great reason why you would want to invest in them, but diversification probably is not the reason, because they're going to act to some of the similar inputs that are going on in the economy that are affecting overall the technology sectors of the market.
Tom, is for a layperson, I guess I look at like the S&P 500. I think it's fascinating because I think a lot of times I look at it, even myself, and I think others probably look at it and say, well, it's a little bit, maybe it's more balanced and like sector wide and different sectors, different weightings. And when you start to point out things like, some of these, you always think of like the rising tide lifting all boats. Well, it seems like that tide is in the S&P 500, only a handful of different stocks that are very heavily pulling the rest along with them. Correct?
Yeah, that handful is very concentrated, and that's the biggest effect on the S&P 500 and the returns. So the technology sector has certainly done well, and because it's done so well, that means that it's grown as a percentage, and then now it's an incredible amount of the weightings. They've actually had to reassign companies because they were getting way too much involved in their technology sectors. So companies like Visa and MasterCard, which used to be considered technology or uh, technological finance companies, they've moved those out of that category.
Mm.
They've moved companies out because there's such a high concentration that the S&P 500 could no longer be considered a diversified index.
Talking this morning with Tom Plumb, certified, chartered financial analyst, of course, with Wisconsin Capital Management. Online, wiscap.com. That's WISCAP.com. Working through some bit of a Mythbusters edition of the program this week. Tom, what about things like smaller companies and some of those value plays and value companies out there? Also international. I think sometimes people look to those. What's the myth in that area?
Well, Sean, because the stock market, the S&P 500, has become so weighted by technology and growth, a lot of financial planners tell people, well, we should diversify by investing in those different sectors, like value companies, international stocks, small stocks, and they look at them and say they'll enhance your return and reduce your volatility. But when you again go through those numbers, you'll see that small cap stocks did great, and they added to this whole myth in the 1970s. Any other time, if you take the last 100 years and take out the 1970s, they did not add to your return, and they actually added to your volatility. Same thing with international stocks. When you look at the 1990s, they did extremely well compared to the US market. And because of that, people think, well, then I can invest in international stocks, they'll diversify me. But when you listen to the news channels in the morning, the first thing they say is, in response to what happened in the US yesterday, Asian markets did this, European markets did that. So they are all interconnected now, and they do not reduce your volatility. And in fact, they've actually reduced your rate of return. And certainly the other view that some people have is value companies. They talk about the growth stocks like NVIDIA, Microsoft, even Apple, Tesla, name those companies. That they've done so well that we'll get a reversion to the mean and people will be able to buy companies that are at cheaper prices. But those companies are at cheaper prices for reasons. Their values, if that value goes up, but they're not necessarily values if the valuation stays low and they don't grow.
Mm-hmm. Talking this morning with Tom Plumb. Of course, Tom comes to us from Wisconsin Capital Management, the website, wiscap.com. I hope you get a chance to check that out today if you haven't been there before. Great day to learn more about Tom and the team at Wisconsin Capital Management. Also, a great day to start that conversation. We're talking, things like portfolio management and other services offered to you from Tom and his team. Again, you can learn more online, wiscap.com. That's WISCAP.com. Got a few more myths. We're going to do some more myth busting with Tom. We will do that next. In the meantime, head on over to the website, wiscap.com. That's WISCAP.com. More of Ask the Experts with Wisconsin Capital Management comes your way next right here on 1310 WIBA. 1310 WIBA and Ask the Experts, joined this morning by Tom Plumb. Of course, Tom comes to us from Wisconsin Capital Management, online, wiscap.com. That's WISCAP.com. Great place to get to know Tom and the team at Wisconsin Capital Management. Of course, also great opportunity there if you're looking to set up an appointment, start that conversation. Great day to do just that. Again, the website, wiscap.com. That's wiscap.com. A little bit of a Mythbusters edition this week, talking about some of the myths out there that are really, and Tom expressed very well in that earlier segment, really holding people back sometimes. And Tom, time. We always hear about time, and time is a very important tool when it comes to investing, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Let's talk about that myth.
Well, Sean, when we talk about time and rate of return, that really makes that eighth wonder of the world. That a lot of times advisors or other people tell you that you can't select the most lucrative investment. So you should really think about time, and time is really important. We often tell our clients the best time to start investing was yesterday, the second best time is today. So it's really important that you start to let that compounding, that time work for you. But the other really significant point is your rate of return. And your rate of return is going to be based on the types of investments you have and then the individual investments that you have. So when we look at the difference between, for example, if you started investing today for the next 30 years for your work environment, and you put $100 a month in, over 30 years, you'd have about $3,700 that you invested. And the 5% compound rate of return, you'd have well over twice that amount in your account at the end of that 30 years. But if you can skew the investments to make sure that you're participating in better returning assets, and you could get a 7.5% return, for example, you'd end up having another 4 times what your original cash investments have been. So it's very important that we structure investments that allow people to participate in the best sectors. And then, as we've said last week, make sure that those sectors that you can't take that volatility, like money you're going to need in the next year, the next few years, reduce the amount that you expose to that higher returning investment that actually has more volatility, and allow then that return to compound for you.
It's pretty amazing when you think about just small tweaks and the the ultimate when it comes to proper opportunities for the greater returns. And as we talked this morning with Tom Plumb with Wisconsin Capital Management, probably very eye-opening, very ear-opening to you this morning. Some really great information from Tom. Don't forget, if you ever miss part of the program, you can always listen back on the website wiscap.com. That's WISCAP.com. Also available on all the popular podcast platforms, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, and the like. You can find them there. Great day to head on over to the website, wiscap.com. That's WISCAP.com. And Tom, before we wrap this week, myth number 4, this is a biggie, and it has to do with people in the financial advisor industry and a little bit of understanding about their role and what they are able to do and what they may not be able to do.
Yeah, Sean, one of the things that we found is that a lot of financial advisors look at investment performance as a 4-letter word. It's very important that you look at how your funds have done. And though there's a saying that we all have to put into everything that says past performance does not indicate what the future performance will be. Past performance is a learning tool. It allows you to look at what things you did right, what things you did wrong. It's one of the reasons why Nathan Plumb and I have our own proprietary mutual fund, so that people can see how their returns have been compared to indexes that were available, or how other professional investment management firms navigated that time. So we have one fund that does use stocks and bonds, and it's meant to have a balance to the those assets and that type of risk. But we constantly are reviewing what we did right, what we did wrong in the environment we were at, and what the future environment is, and how we should react and how we should invest in anticipation of those trends, those valuations, those connections between the returns.
Tom, as we wrap up this week, any recommendations? I mean, for folks that are listening to the program, saying loving what they're hearing and interested in learning more, what steps can they be taking? What should they be doing as far as taking a look at what they're doing and what could be done better?
Well, I think that people should definitely take a look at and objectively look at how they're doing. See if they're not only, in quote, meeting the plan as somebody has written for you, but how are your investments doing? Are they doing what you expected them to? Are they doing what the market allowed you to do? As there's a lot of literature that tells us that most people investing in the markets don't match the performance of the availability of the returns in those different sectors. So you really need to look at, is your portfolio manager, is your financial planner adding to value? Are they allowing you to participate in the types of investments that make sense for you? And you may find that your accountant or even Certainly someone like our firm will take a look at your portfolio, tell you how you're structured, what those goals are, and how they match up with your returns. And then looking at the overall, how was the execution? Are you adding value? Are you participating in the markets that you should be participating? And are you avoiding some of the volatility that you want to avoid? And is your portfolio structured correctly? Um, Certainly at Wisconsin Capital Management, we would do that for no charge, look at someone's investment portfolio and give them some, what we think, good direction as to how that portfolio should be structured.
That's great. You talk about that portfolio review, no charge. What a great opportunity that is for folks. If you've got questions, you want, of course, have Tom and the team take a look at your portfolio, get a review. All you got to do is head on over to the website and get all the information on how to set up an appointment. That's whizcap.com. That's WISCAP.com, whizcap.com. Of course, Tom comes to us from Wisconsin Capital Management. He's chartered financial analyst with Wisconsin Capital Management. Again, that website, whizcap.com. Tom, it's great chatting with you as always. You have a fantastic day, and we'll talk real soon.
Yeah, we'll talk next week about some of the implications of the tax laws that are affecting people differently than they have prior years.
Oh, that'll be an exciting program for sure. In the meantime, if you haven't been to the website, head on over to whizcap.com. News comes your way next right here on 1310 WIBA.